Imagine a criminal empire so vast, so heavily armed, and just so aggressively expansive that it basically functions like a fully mobilized paramilitary state. Now imagine that the architect behind this whole operation is, well, a complete phantom, a guy who literally haunts international law enforcement, orchestrating all this global chaos without leaving a single trace. Who exactly is this ghost kingpin? To really grasp the scale of the threat we're talking about, just take a look at this number. $15 million. That is the staggering reward currently offered by the US government for information leading to his capture. I mean, it's one of the highest bounties ever placed on a human being. It absolutely dwarfs the initial $5 million bounty that was once placed on his former boss, El Chapo. Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today, we're looking at the terrifying, meteoric rise of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. You probably know him by the name the world fears, El Mencho. He's the leader of the CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. We're going to decode exactly how a poor farmer transformed into the undisputed, totally untouchable ruler of the global criminal underworld.
Section 1. The $15 million Ghost. Let's look at this global enterprise.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer magnitude of El Mencho's operation today. Look at that overwhelming market dominance. CJNG is responsible for a full third of all drugs entering the United States. We're talking about mind-boggling logistics here. Every single month, his cartel smuggles roughly 5 tons of cocaine and 5 tons of meth across the border. Annually, that translates to about $8.1 billion in cocaine and $4.6 billion in meth. It's basically a hyper-efficient, multi-billion-dollar corporate supply chain, just, built entirely on illicit narcotics.
Section 2. From poverty to prison. It's time to look at his humble origins.
You see, this sophisticated global enterprise definitely didn't start in a corporate boardroom. Born in 1966 in a small town in Michoacan, Mexico, El Mencho grew up in a huge, severely impoverished family of avocado farmers. Back then, the local cartel mafia heavily exploited these farmers, basically denying them fair pay for their crops. So, forced by extreme poverty, El Mencho dropped out of school in just the 5th grade to go to work. But harboring ambitions way beyond the avocado fields, he eventually made the choice to leave his country and migrate to the US illegally to seek a very different kind of fortune.
Let's move to this timeline and see how this builds, because his time in the US was definitely not a success story at first. It was actually a really rapid criminal escalation. In 1986, he gets arrested in San Francisco for theft and possession of a loaded gun. Fast forward to 1989, he's arrested again for selling drugs and deported back to Mexico. But he relentlessly crossed right back over, teaming up with his older brother Abraham to push narcotics. They specifically learned the highly lucrative meth trade that was just absolutely booming in America at the time.
This relentless cycle culminated in a really pivotal moment in 1992. El Mencho and his brother were at a bar in San Francisco, right in the middle of a heroin deal. As the buyers handed over the cash, El Mencho noticed something that set off alarm bells. The bills were perfectly clean and systematically packed. His instincts screamed that these were undercover cops. He tried to warn his brother, but, well, it was too late. 3 weeks later, they were arrested. Facing the judge, El Mencho initially pleaded not guilty, but when they threatened that Abraham would get a life sentence if he didn't cooperate, El Mencho sacrificed his own freedom. He took the fall, served years in a Texas prison, and was eventually paroled back to Mexico in 1997. Moving on to Section 3, Infiltrating the Police, a major strategic pivot. Now, deported and back in Mexico, you'd probably think a former convict would just lay low, right? Nope. Instead, El Mencho pulled off a classic Trojan horse maneuver. He officially became a police officer in the Jalisco municipalities of Cabo Corrientes and Tomatlan. But get this, he wasn't there to enforce the law. His one and only purpose was to learn exactly how to defeat law enforcement from the inside. He wanted to understand their operational tactics, their security protocols, the whole shebang when it came to their communication networks.
Above all, he totally immersed himself in this concept, counterintelligence. By deeply understanding how the police track, monitor, and raid criminal networks, he was literally writing the playbook on how to evade them in the future. Once he'd absorbed everything he needed to know, he just quit the force. And honestly, this specific insider police training is the exact reason why authorities are completely unable to catch him today.
Section 4. The birth of CJNG, the rise of a new generation.
Armed with this tactical knowledge, El Mencho entered the era where he would build his own hyper-violent empire. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how methodically he built his forces. He wasn't just hiring random street thugs. He built a private army using incredibly dark modern recruitment tactics. First, they weaponized social media. They post videos showing off military-grade weapons and extreme violence just to project invincibility. Second, they used this twisted Robin Hood-style charity, providing food, housing, and jobs to lure in impoverished, desperate youth. And finally, these new recruits were put through brutal, uncompromising military training. Through these methods, he actually amassed a private army of over 5,000 highly trained combatants.
The result of all this militarization is a scale of operations that's genuinely terrifying. Under his leadership, CJ&G rapidly outpaced older, much more established cartels. Today, they operate in 31 out of Mexico's 32 states. Their reach extends across 6 different continents, and the financial war chest backing all this violence is estimated at a staggering $50 billion in cartel assets. El Mencho himself? He's sitting on an estimated personal net worth of around $1 billion.
Which brings us to Section 5, a reign of terror. Brutal retaliation.
Now, this massive wealth and territory wasn't acquired through, polite negotiation. It was seized through an absolute reign of terror. While other cartels historically relied pretty heavily on bribery to corrupt the system, El Mencho operates on a very strict death-to-anyone-in-the-way policy. He spares absolutely no one. Police officers, military personnel, high-ranking politicians, cabinet ministers, investigative journalists, federal judges. If you oppose CJ&G, you become a target. He doesn't think twice before pulling the trigger.
The starkest realization of this came in May 2015. The Mexican government realized local police were just hopelessly outgunned by CJ&G's 50-caliber sniper rifles and machine guns. So they launched Operation Jalisco and sent in the military. Well, El Mencho's response? His forces literally used a rocket-propelled grenade launcher to shoot a military helicopter right out of the sky, killing 6 soldiers. Then they set fire to gas stations and dozens of vehicles across the state just to block reinforcements. It was this shocking display of military-grade firepower that made the government realize they weren't fighting a standard drug cartel anymore. They were fighting a highly advanced paramilitary insurgency.
Fast forward to 2020, and this terrifying reality was fully cemented. The Mexico City police chief, Omar Garcia Harfuch, was ambushed right in the safest, most affluent neighborhood of the capital. CJ&G hitmen blocked his armored SUV with a truck and unleashed over 400 bullets in a matter of minutes. Miraculously, Harfuch survived, though he did take 3 bullets. And from his hospital bed, he immediately sent out a tweet declaring El Mencho as Mexico's biggest criminal.
Section 6, the untouchable kingpin. The ghost returns.
All of this brings us to the ultimate mystery. Despite waging an open war against the state, El Mencho remains completely untouchable. Just to understand his audacity, think about what happened when his only real rival, El Chapo of the Sinaloa cartel, was captured and extradited in 2016. Up until then, the two cartels had this fragile truce, but the very second Chapo was locked away for life, El Mencho shattered that peace deal. Just to assert his absolute dominance and show everyone that the Sinaloa cartel's time was up, he sent his men into an upscale restaurant in Jalisco and kidnapped 2 of El Chapo's sons, who were just there celebrating a birthday. Sure, they were eventually released for a massive multi-million-dollar ransom, but the message was sent loud and clear. El Mencho was the new, undisputed king.
Yet the pressure from American and Mexican authorities has been absolutely relentless. I mean, they've successfully hunted down almost his entire inner circle. His wife Rosalinda, his son Ruben, who goes by Menchito, his brothers Antonio and Abraham, and his brother-in-law Abigail, they have all been captured and imprisoned. The authorities have seized hundreds of millions of dollars, they've arrested thousands of CJ&G foot soldiers, but El Mencho, nothing. He remains a total ghost.
So the crucial point is understanding exactly how he does it. When we compare him to the infamous kingpins of the past, the difference is literally night and day. Guys like El Chapo and Pablo Escobar were fame-hungry, right? They loved public attention, they lived in flashy luxury, and honestly, their massive egos ultimately led to their capture. El Mencho is the exact opposite. He despises public attention, he doesn't live in flashy mansions, he lives completely isolated in the rugged, dense mountainous jungles of Jalisco, Michoacan, and Colima, and he is constantly on the move. Plus, he's highly disciplined. He doesn't even consume alcohol, let alone drugs. Even within his own cartel, only a tiny handful of people have ever actually seen his face, and law enforcement has maybe 3 or 4 outdated photographs of him. His ascetic, invisible lifestyle, that is his ultimate armor.
But as history has shown us time and time again, the criminal underworld is a relentless cycle. The throne is never stable for long.
Where Pablo Escobar once stood, El Chapo followed. And where El Chapo reigned, El Mencho now rules with an iron, invisible fist. He is the $15 million ghost currently haunting the global stage. But the question that lingers in the shadows is this. In a world built entirely on violence and betrayal, when El Mencho's reign finally comes to an end, who on earth will be ruthless enough to take his place?